All right, let's talk about something that sounds completely made up, but I promise you, it's in the history books. We're diving into the time cavalry, yes, horsemen, captured a navy, a whole fleet of warships. I mean, just look at this. You've got soldiers on horseback charging across a frozen sea straight towards these massive warships. It's a picture that just breaks your brain a little bit, right? Capturing a fleet with cavalry, it's not just rare, it's pretty much a one-of-a-kind event.
So, the big question is, how? How does something like this even happen? How did a bunch of French cavalrymen get the chance to square off against the Dutch Navy? And what really went down out there on the ice?
Okay, so to get to the bottom of this, we've got to start with the legend. You know, the version of the story that's so good, it's almost a myth. So the story goes, it's a freezing cold night, January 1795. A group of French hussars, these are the elite, fast-moving cavalry, they spot their prize, an entire Dutch fleet, completely trapped in the ice of this bay, called the Zuiderzee. And instead of, well, doing anything logical, they decide to do the impossible. They charge.
And get this, the legend says it wasn't just some crazy spur-of-the-moment thing. Nope, the plan was brilliant. The hussars had infantrymen riding with them for extra firepower. They supposedly even wrapped their horses' hooves in cloth to sneak up on the ships without making a sound on the ice. Think about that. It's a stealth attack on a navy with horses. That is an absolutely wild plan.
But you know, a story this crazy doesn't just happen out of nowhere. To really understand what's going on, we need some context. We need to look at the politics and even the weather of the time.
So all of this is going down during the French Revolutionary Wars. France has this new, super radical government, and their army is basically on a tour of Europe. They've just invaded the Dutch Republic. And the spot we're talking about is right up here, Den Helder, at the northern tip of Holland. This was a huge naval base for the Dutch.
Okay, and this is where things get really messy, and it happens fast. The timeline is key. So fall 94, the French invade. Then, bam, January 19th, the Dutch government falls apart. A new, revolutionary Batavian Republic pops up. And guess what? They're allied with France. Now here's the kicker. 2 days later, just 2, this new government tells its own navy at Den Helder, do not fight the French. The French cavalry doesn't even show up for another 2 days. So in less than a week, they went from mortal enemies to allies.
And as if all that political drama wasn't enough, Mother Nature decided to get in on the action. This wasn't just a cold winter, it was brutal. The whole Zuiderzee, which is this huge bay, froze solid. I mean, thick, solid ice. And that's what trapped the Dutch fleet in the first place. This crazy weather is the only reason any of this was even on the table. All right, so we've got the epic story and we've got the messy political reality. Let's put them together and play detective. What actually happened out there on the ice?
So was it this incredible, heroic cavalry charge, a real battle on the ice? Or was the truth a little less exciting?
Well, when you start digging through the archives, you find 2 totally different versions of the event. The legend, that mostly comes from French accounts, but when historians looked at the Dutch Navy's own records, you know, official reports, letters from the officers who were actually there, they found a story that paints a very different picture. And it lines up perfectly with that crazy timeline we just looked at.
Yeah, the Dutch records are pretty clear. The historian who pieced it all together, De Jonge, basically said, look, this wasn't a battle, it wasn't a charge, it was a handover. A few French soldiers just walked across the ice to sort out the details of a surrender that had already been decided.
So you have to imagine the Dutch commander, this guy Hermanus Rentjes. He's not getting his men ready for the fight of their lives. He's got his orders from his new government. He's basically just sitting there, waiting for the French to arrive so he can officially hand over the keys to the fleet.
And let's be clear, this was a huge deal. We're not talking about a couple of fishing boats. This was 5 massive ships of the line, 3 frigates, plus a bunch of smaller ships. This was a serious chunk of the entire Dutch Navy.
And think about the firepower. All told, the French got their hands on 850 cannons. 850! And they did it without firing a single shot. So, you know, heroic charge or quiet negotiation, the end result was the same, a huge win for France.
So that begs the question, right? If it was just a peaceful handover, why do we have these epic paintings and stories of a cavalry charge? Well, that gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? It's all about the power of a good story.
That handover on the ice was really just the start. A few months later, it all became official with the Treaty of The Hague.
The Dutch became formal allies of the French, and that fleet was officially put to work for the French cause.
So again, why do we remember the charge and not the paperwork?
And honestly, the answer is simple. The story of horsemen capturing warships is just a way better story. It's dramatic, it's epic, it's unforgettable. A story about a negotiated surrender? Not so much. The myth is great propaganda and an amazing campfire tale, and that's why it's the version that stuck.
And that leaves us with something really interesting to think about. This whole event is a perfect example of how history isn't just what happened. It's about the stories we decide to tell about it. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other facts that we all take for granted are actually just a story that was too good to fact-check?